Hello, my name's Mark Reed, and I'm going to be sharing today with you some of the key successes and challenges of financing peatland restoration with reference to our experience, in particular in Scotland. Now, I sit on the executive board of the Peatland Code, of which I was one of the original architects, and we are regularly asked for advice by other countries trying to set up similar mechanisms. As one of the first such schemes, we now have a lot of experience to share. And I hope that by sharing some of the challenges we're facing and how we're addressing these, it will be possible for others to avoid some of the challenges and adapt our solutions to their own contexts. First of all, I should explain a little bit more about what the Peatland Code is. Renee Kirkfleet-Hermans will be speaking more about this later on today. Essentially, though, it's a voluntary certification standard for UK peatland projects that want to market the climate benefits of peatland restoration by selling carbon credits. It provides assurances to UK voluntary carbon market buyers that the climate benefits being sold are real, quantifiable, additional, and permanent. The good news is that the code is growing really rapidly at the moment. We've more than doubled the number of projects in the last year, and there's now more demand than we can supply, with pending issuance units selling at between £10 and £20 per unit, and the highest so far recorded at £25. And of course, we expect these to be worth much more in future as they're converted to verified carbon units. I'm going to put aside for a moment the issue of corresponding adjustments in the Article 6 negotiations, which are going on right now. Of course, in the worst case scenario, this could significantly constrain or even kill off domestic carbon markets. We can discuss that later if you want, but for now, I'm going to focus on challenges that we can do something about. The key challenge that we see in the UK around financing peatland restoration is on the supply side. And here are some of the biggest issues. First of all, lack of awareness among the land management community, uncertainty from government around future eligibility for public funding, complexity and red tape. And although this is rapidly improving, there are still too few advisors with project development skills. Some landowners are concerned about the length of contracts that they have to sign. There are concerns that market models that might benefit brokers more than the landowners, and there is a contractor shortage. We are, however, working on a number of solutions to these challenges. We've just heard about Peatland Action from Peter Hutchinson, but there's a big opportunity for government to create certainty around eligibility for public funding if landowners enter the code. A big part of this is going to be designing agri-environment schemes so that they effectively integrate or blend with carbon finance. Now, I'm going to talk a bit more about these options in the session this afternoon, but in summary, there are three broad approaches we might take. First, we can go for full public-private co-procurement of public goods, where we integrate public and private finance in a single fund at a landscape scale designed to deliver multiple outcomes. Second, we can opt for coordinated public-private funding. In this model, public and private payments are delineated in space or time, enabling the market to pay for as much as possible, while public payments focus on market failures and those who are not prepared to accept private finance. And finally, we've got the business as usual scenario where private funding pays for services that are not being procured by the public funding, but with limited coordination. Although I think that the co-procurement model is probably the best for climate, nature and people, if challenges can be overcome, and there are challenges, I'll talk about them this afternoon. I think that probably the most likely option that we're going to see is coordinated public-private funding of public goods. And there are a range of blending mechanisms that could be used to do this more on the screen. One of these mechanisms is the idea of a carbon floor price guarantee. This was originally proposed in Scotland by Finance Earth. In this model, landowners put together Peatland Code projects and enter them into a reverse auction, with the lowest credible bids being funded until the scheme is full, ensuring good value for money. A private finance facility could be made available to projects to cover capital works to restore peatlands, essentially offering loans to be paid back over the project's duration. And so landowners would be able to factor those repayments into their bids to the reverse auction. As verification points are reached and verified carbon units are generated, landowners can sell to the government at the guaranteed floor price, or they can sell into the carbon market if higher prices are available there. In the best case scenario, carbon markets increase in value rapidly enough that none of the projects use the guarantee, and the government doesn't have to spend a penny. It can reinvest that money back into future guarantees. Now, complexity and red tape are regularly identified as challenges in carbon markets, but the Peatland Code is no worse than any other comparable scheme, and in fact, it's a lot better than some schemes, I would argue. So instead, I think that more important than simply simplifying the code is training advisors who can help develop projects under the code in the same way that they currently help their clients fill out forms to access public funding. There's an army of trusted advisors already working with all of the key peatland landowners right across the country. And they have the ability to make things very easy for these landowners if they can see a benefit in it for them and their clients. Finally, we're going to be hearing from Richard Hall next, and I wonder whether green funds like his will be considering peatland sites for restoration. There are now a number of large green funds looking at land acquisition for carbon in the UK. And I wonder whether peatland sites may in some cases be more attractive than tree planting sites, because entering them into the code doesn't result in short-term loss of land value, unlike changing productive farmland to forest. And of course, it doesn't displace food production either. Before I conclude, I think it's important to consider how the values and behaviours of land managers and landowners come into all of this. I think that we sometimes don't appreciate that when considering whether or not to engage with peatland carbon markets, there are actually two components that land managers have to engage with. First, whether or not to restore their peatland, but second, whether or not they're willing to do this as part of a carbon market scheme. And this, of course, includes moral considerations, for example, around the identity and motives of investors, as well as technical considerations, for example, contract lengths. These two parts of the decision are influenced by a range of internal and external factors. Internal factors are more likely to influence attitudes towards engaging with carbon markets, things like their perception of risk, which in turn will be influenced by their personal characteristics, cognitive biases, and the profitability of their operation. Pre-existing attitudes towards climate change and carbon markets, and deeper value orientations, which I'll touch on in a moment. On the other hand, external factors are more likely to influence whether a land manager is predisposed to consider restoring their peatland, things like their land tenure, size of land holding, and their access to advice and support. So, to conclude, if we want to build a stronger pipeline of peatland restoration projects for investment, we need to ensure that the economic model is sufficiently attractive. And this isn't just about the price per tonne of carbon. It's about the transparency and perceived fairness of those prices, so landowners don't worry that they're being sold short. A peatland carbon guarantee could create this transparency and enable landowners to retain verified units for future sale as carbon markets carbon prices rise, rather than brokers taking all the profits. Secondly, we need to obviously provide certainty around eligibility for future public payments, ideally by integrating public and private funding in blended schemes that clearly define how both types of payments will interact in future. Third, land agents and advisors are currently advising their clients to hold back from entering carbon markets due to these uncertainties. But with the right economic model and messaging from governments, this community is likely to mobilise to start developing projects with their clients. These advisors already have networks of landowners with strong bonds of trust. We therefore need to be ready to train these advisors as interest increases. Fourthly, we need to nuance our messaging to landowners. We need to focus on reducing actual and perceived risks associated with peatland code projects. Some landowners are likely to be sold on the environmental benefits alone, but this is typically those with biospheric or social altruistic value orientations. For those who are more egocentric in their value orientation, messages need to emphasize financial benefits to the land manager, productivity, a sense of achievement, or the respect of peers. Finally, who delivers the message matters. I just co-authored a paper led by Dr. Nikki Rust called "Have Farmers Had Enough of Experts?" And in short, the answer is yes. There is evidence that land managers are naturally distrustful of information in the farming press, from government, researchers, and many advisors, and are more likely to do peatland restoration on the recommendation of other land managers than any other source. I'm going to conclude things at this point. If you want to follow up our paper on different options for blending for peatlands and other kinds of environments and markets, get in touch. That's my email address. Or you can read that paper and other publications relating to blending public finance with private finance on the Resilient Dairy Landscapes website. Thank you.